Today we're going to use page 13 and we're going to read about the Underground Railroad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you through the first two paragraphs, and then I want you to do the third one on your own, okay? So one thing I do want you to do is I want you to go ahead and split this last box into two parts so that we have 3 boxes total so that we can do an inference for each paragraph. So first I'm just going to go ahead and read the passage so that we can understand what it says. The Underground Railroad. In the 1830s, Americans could ride trains to travel, but some people traveled on a different kind of railroad. This one had no cars or tracks. It started when slaves in the South began to escape from their owners. Then, when slaves escaped, they became fugitives. They ran and hid from the law. A few white people decided to help these slaves. Some of them helped by hiding the fugitives in wagons and moving them to stations. These stations were houses where fugitives could hide until it was safe to move again. The fugitives traveled from place to place until they reached Canada. People called this system the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman was a conductor on this secret railroad. She had once been a slave, but she escaped to freedom with help from the Underground Railroad. Tubman returned to the South 19 times to guide fugitives to freedom. If she had been caught, she would have been forced back into slavery. Through the years, Tubman helped more than 300 people find freedom. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and reread each paragraph, and I'm going to ask you a question that will encourage you to inference. So remembering, inferencing is taking details from the story plus things that you already know to draw some sort of conclusion. Okay? It's things that they don't actually tell you, but that you can logically conclude from the reading. Okay, so I'm going to reread this paragraph. In the 1830s, Americans could ride trains to travel, but some people traveled on a different kind of railroad. This one had no cars or tracks. It started when slaves in the South began to escape from their owners. When slaves escaped, they became fugitives. They ran and hid from the law. Okay? So, here's what I want you to inference right here. Why did the slaves hide from the law? Well, one detail that tells us is that when slaves escaped, they became fugitives. So, a fugitive is somebody who's running from the law. So, what is something that you know about slavery? Well, something I know about slavery is that many people kept slaves and that some of the owners would run after slaves if they ran away, and that it was illegal for a slave to run away from their owner. So what I know, it was illegal for slaves to run away, and that many slave owners chased after runaway slaves. So those are things that I know. So, because of the details in the text and what I know, I can draw the conclusion or inference that slaves hid from the law because they didn't want to be slaves anymore. They were afraid of being captured. So you might have drawn a slightly different conclusion than I did, but that's okay. It's because it's an inference. So it's what you noticed in the text plus things that you know and the conclusion you draw. So there are some right answers, but at the same time, it is a lot based off of your thoughts and what you got from the text. I'm going to go ahead and read the next paragraph, and we'll do that one together. A few white people decided to help slaves. Some helped by hiding the fugitives in wagons and moving them to stations. These stations were houses where fugitives could hide until it was safe to move again. The fugitives traveled from place to place until they reached Canada. People called this system the Underground Railroad. So my question now is, why do you think they called the houses stations? Well, let's see. Moving them to stations. Well, a station, they're talking about, they called them stations because they called this the underground. They called it the Underground Railroad. And there's stations for trains. So something I just know is that trains stop at stations. Thus, I can draw the conclusion that homes were called stations because the whole system was called the Underground Railroad. Okay, so they called it the Underground Railroad, so that would make sense with stations because I know that trains stop at stations. Thus, houses were called stations because the whole system was called the Underground Railroad. And also, it might have also helped keep it a secret if people heard them talking. All right, I'm going to read the last paragraph, and then you're going to fill in the details and what you know and inference on your own. Harriet Tubman was a conductor of this secret railroad. She had once been a slave, but she escaped to freedom with help from the Underground Railroad. Tubman returned to the South 19 times to guide fugitives to freedom. If she had been caught, she would have been forced back into slavery. Through the years, Tubman helped more than 300 people find freedom. Here's what I want you to think about now. So, how difficult was it to ride on the Underground Railroad? So I want you to think about things in the text that show how difficult it was to do this. Think about what you know about people escaping from slavery, and then draw your own conclusion. When you're finished, go ahead and take a picture of your work and turn it in.